Welcome to Mind Your Being. Whether you're a returning listener or you're new here, I'm so grateful you're taking a little time out of your day to care for your health and well-being. I'm so excited to release today's episode of Mind Your Being. I'm joined by Professor Belinda Beck, a world-leading researcher in bone health and exercise science, to talk about how our bones really respond to movement, nutrition, and lifestyle as we age. We explore why it's never too late to strengthen your bones, the types of exercise that genuinely make a difference. We also discuss the groundbreaking findings showing that even post-menopausal women with osteoporosis can improve bone density with the right exercise, the right supervision, and the right program. I want to encourage you to listen to this conversation because the choices we make in midlife shape how strong, mobile, and independent we feel for decades to come. If you're in midlife and wondering how to care for your body in a way that supports long-term strength and quality of life, you're going to love this episode. Please enjoy. Welcome to Mind Your Being, Belinda. Thank you for making the time today.
Pleasure. Lovely to be here.
I've asked you on today to talk about how exercise benefits our bones across our whole life and to talk about the findings, which were surprising to some, from your research on postmenopausal women with low to very low bone mass. But before we get into all of that, could you please tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be interested in the relationship between exercise and healthy bones?
Yeah, as many people do, I got into the area because I had sore shins when I ran. And so that got me thinking, as a very young athlete, what's going on? This doesn't make any sense. I'm very healthy and I don't understand why I've got this sore bit on my bones. So the start of my research career was really into bone stress injuries, but that morphed into an interest into the effect of exercise on bone in general, because in actual fact, bone stress injuries tend to look after themselves. They tend to get better if you just rest them, whereas osteoporosis is something that goes the other way. You develop it as you age typically, and once you have it, you need to do something active to try and improve the bone mass. So it's a huge problem. It is prevalent. It is expensive. It's painful. It really impacts people's quality of life, and it shortens people's life, and it shortens their health span. So the number of years where they are happy and healthy. So it became an interest just of the public health need. And of course, underlying everything that I do is the importance of exercise and the benefit to all our systems.
I have to admit, I'm one of those people who I didn't know a lot about bone, and I didn't think a lot about bone until I hit menopause. And then you start to really think about and hear about how important bone health is. So I think the public health need is really important, and to look at it from the preventative lens as well. What can we do to have that longer health span, as you said?
Yeah, that's right. Nobody thinks about their bones until they break something. They're just there. They're invisible, and they do their stuff very quietly. It's not all about just holding us up, upright, supporting us. They help us move because the muscles need things to pull on. So actually, they're really important for movement. But also they are this reservoir of minerals and other substances that help our body function. So they're the calcium bank. We need calcium. We go to the calcium bank and make withdrawals. So it's a very metabolically active tissue, really important that we pay attention to it. And as you say, we don't tend to until we are actually at a point where we're having fractures or we're at risk of fractures.
I wish we learnt more about this earlier. It's so important. In a previous episode, we had a guest, Dr. Tracy Clissold, on, and she talked about the importance of building strong, healthy bones, that important window up until the age of 30. But for people who didn't listen to that episode, could you please explain what's happening with the building of bones in our first 30 years and why it's so important for parents to understand this?
Yeah, well, it actually makes perfect sense when somebody tells you about it, but it's still normally surprising when I say to people, we have all the bone we're ever going to have by the time we're about 20. For men, it's a little longer than that. But yeah, and that's referred to as your peak bone mass, because if you kept growing more bone, we would all be enormous. so we do, when you stop growing after puberty, largely your bones, your growth plates fuse and you stop growing in length, but the bones sort of consolidate a little bit as you get slightly bigger, as you finish growing into maturity. But that is the most bone you're ever going to have. We know now that the most important thing you can do to reduce your risk of fracture at the end of life is to optimize your peak bone mass. And so that window is only open in those growing years, the first 2 decades of your life, basically. There are a couple of periods where we grow like crazy. The very young years, like newborn through to age 2, we're growing like crazy, and you'd see that almost before your eyes. And then the next growth spurt is puberty, and that's particularly in boys. You can see that happening almost as you watch them. Really, really important. And those times that there's enough available nutrition and the loading that the bones are experiencing is healthy loading, so that the bones grow in the best possible way that they can and grow as much as your genetic potential will allow. Because genes do determine, really, the bone that we have.
Thank you. So what is it about exercise, or how do particular types of exercise impact the bone and influence the health of our bones?
Exercise in general, I can make this comment very generally about all the tissues in the body. Exercise is great for all the tissues in the body. It's great for increasing blood flow, and, muscle tissue needs to be active to stay strong and get stronger. Bone needs to be strong enough to resist fracture. And so Wolff's Law, roughly in general, says that your bones will adapt to the loads that you put on them. And so if you are somebody who has played a lot of, let's say, rugby league all your life, that is a very intensive, heavy loading kind of exercise. And so that will make your bones adapt to that kind of exercise and be strong enough to accommodate that without breaking. And you could, replace rugby league with any other very heavy loading exercise. On the contrary, if you go into space and you unload your bones, because you take away the force of gravity and the need for the muscles to contract strongly to move you through the air, your bones will resorb and you'll actually get rid of a lot of bone. And we can create a bit of a model of microgravity by putting people in bed rest. That's also unloading the skeleton, and so bone will resorb. Putting a cast on your arm will make the muscles not use that as much, and so you will actually lose bone in that immobilized limb. Spinal cord injury, unloading the parts of the body that are no longer weight-bearing and so on. So bone is extremely responsive to load, but in the main, we have a genetic blueprint that tells our body, our skeleton, to grow to a certain size. If we underload it, you probably won't grow as much as you possibly could. And if you overload it, you might grow a little bit more. And so this is the principle of overload and how we can harness that to improve our bone mass and health throughout life. At any time of life, the principle applies. If you unload, you'll lose bone. If you overload, you'll grow bone. And that can still be applied in old age.
Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about. Before we get to the LIFTMOR study, can you please explain what starts to happen after 30 or after 20 in terms of bone loss, and also how bone loss is accelerated at the time of menopause?
Yeah, sure. So it's sort of along the same lines as what I was just talking about, loading and unloading. If you remain as physically active throughout young adulthood as you were, when you gained your peak bone mass, you should hang on to most of that bone. That is helping you to hold on to that bone. But typically, people are not as active as they're older as they were when they were younger. And so after you've sort of gained your peak bone mass, and let's say that's around 25, we'll split the difference between men and women, say it's about 25. After that, you sort of plateau for a little bit, and then you'll gradually begin to lose bone mass. Now, at the age around menopause, what causes menopause is the withdrawal of circulating estrogen. Estrogen is extremely protective of bone because it helps to inhibit or slow down the activity of one of the bone cells that resorbs bone. And that resorption is really important for things like, when you go to the bone bank and get some calcium out, it's those cells that are regulating that, or at least are managing that, removing bone. But estrogen tends to clamp those cells so that they don't remove too much. Now, if you have reduced amounts of circulating estrogen, perimenopause and menopause, then those cells have a little bit of a party for a couple of years because they're not as inhibited and they start removing more bone. So there is a period about 5 to 8 years across the menopause and a couple of years after where women lose bone much more rapidly than they do at the rest of their life. And then it tends to sort of level out again, and you then go on to sort of lose roughly the same amount as men throughout the rest of life. So this is the reason why osteoporosis is often considered a women's hormone disease, because of that relationship with estrogen. But of course, there are all sorts of other things that can contribute to that loss.
Thank you for that. And is men's bone loss, because they don't have the same relationship with estrogen, is it a slower decline, like a more gradual decline for men?
That's right, because they don't have that sudden withdrawal of that very powerful hormone. They do have hormones that are regulating their bone mass as well, and those do tend to, including estrogen, but testosterone as well, and those tend to sort of gradually decline across life as well. And of course, this decline is, I believe, very closely associated with the reduction in physical activity that most people undergo as they age.
Could you tell us a bit about what led you to create this study and what the main aims of the LIFTMOR clinical trial were?
Yeah, the goal for people like me who believe in exercise as, as medicine, the aim, if you can see a system that is deteriorating and that seems to be associated with also a reduction in exercise, would be to just increase the amount of exercise, and you should be able to reverse things. Well, the trouble is, other people who thought the same thing had tried to add exercise in as a way of moderating or reducing the bone loss that occurs across age, and for people who had very low bone mass to maybe grow some more. But the kinds of exercise they were testing were not showing any great efficacy. So they weren't showing that they were able to, none of them were really showing that they could grow decent amounts of bone. The typical recommended kind of exercise that your doctor would say, we'll just go do some walking, maybe some swimming and cycling, because obviously you're very frail and you might fracture. So you better do these gentle exercises, Tai Chi and those sorts of things. Those will positively not even stop bone loss. It's better than doing nothing. And I really want to emphasize that. And when people say to me, well, so I shouldn't walk. No, that's not the message. Because all of those other forms of exercise are so good for all the other tissues in your body. But if you're trying to grow bone, you need to load the bones more. And those are not sufficiently high intensity. So the idea with LIFTMOR was to say, well, if those exercises aren't intense enough, maybe we need to try a higher intensity exercise. And if the concern about this is that we might cause fracture, then we have to do this very carefully, and we'll make sure we've supervised it. We'll load people up gradually from a very low level to a high level, and we'll track them to try and prevent injury. And that's what the LIFTMOR study was.
It's brilliant, as you're going to tell us in a minute. Could you tell us a bit more detail about the trial? So who participated in the trial? What were the kinds of exercises you got them doing? The trial went for 8 months, is that right? And perhaps, as I mentioned before, people were quite surprised at the findings of this trial. I guess, is that because the common belief was that, well, as you said before, you're too frail to be lifting heavier weights. You're too frail to be doing weightlifting.
I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why people were surprised with the findings, and probably the primary one was that everyone had just decided that exercise didn't work for bone, because everybody had tried all these other ones, and that didn't work. And then, of course, secondarily was, well, if you did it, they were really surprised that you didn't hurt anyone, because it's ridiculous. People with very frail bones, and you're making them lift and do impact, and that's amazing that they didn't get hurt. So in a nutshell, it was what we call high RIT, high intensity resistance and impact training. It was a very simple program. I don't describe the actual exercises because I don't want people hurting themselves, because this is a supervised program. That is the caveat. It needs to be supervised by someone who actually knows what they're doing. So an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist, or somebody of similar training. And we designed so that it would be quite brief, because a lot of people who do have low bone mass they're still working. So they're busy. They often have kids, they have parents they're looking after. These are busy people. So twice a week, 30 minutes. The reason it ran for 8 months, ordinarily a bone trial will run for 12 months, but this was run as a PhD project, and the fellow who was running the trial, Steve Watson, needed to graduate in time, and so we actually reduced the intervention to 8 months, because we thought that we would see a change in that time period. That was the reason there's nothing magical about the number 8. It's just that it's as short a time period as we could go, and we thought we would still be able to detect a change. So twice a week, 30 minutes, 8 months, we randomly allocated people who we had recruited who were post-menopause, so they had to be 60 or older, and they had low to very low bone mass, and that was tested by bone density. So I had to have a T-score, and I can explain that later if you'd like, that was osteopenic or osteoporotic. And so we specifically wanted to test the people that this would be meaningful for, and that everyone was terrified about. So there's no point testing healthy young people. We knew that this program would be safe for them. We had to test the people it would affect, so that we knew that they could tolerate it and whether it would actually be effective. So the study itself was a couple of years, because to recruit 100 people to be able to randomly allocate to high RIT or to the control group, we needed longer than the actual 8 months. You wouldn't get the whole group right at the start. So it was sort of a staggered program. Yeah. The people who were randomized to control, we didn't say do nothing. We said, we'll give you a low intensity home program twice a week, 30 minutes, 8 months. So same sort of thing, only it's what typically people would have recommended for osteoporosis in the past. And we wanted to show, and I was reasonably confident, that this low intensity home program would not help. And it didn't. People lost bone. So at the start and the end, we tested bone density, so BMD, what people normally test on to test for osteoporosis. But we also looked at the shape of bone, the size of bone, and then we looked at a whole lot of risk factors for falling. These are functional things that are really important to keep people on their feet, because we know that fractures are normally a result of a fall. And these were things like tandem walk, walking along a straight line, heel to toes, and timing people, and standing up and sitting down out of a chair, timing how long that takes, looking at people's posture and straight, a whole bunch of those factors. And then at the end of it, we just compared the outcomes between those two groups. That was basically it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love how you also included the functional fitness factors in there, because obviously at the end of the day, it needs to make sense to real life, our daily activities. You mentioned that the control group, the group who didn't do the intervention, they actually lost bone mass. But can you tell us what your findings were for the group who did the testing intervention, the LIFTMOR?
This was what was so wonderful about it. We did show that the high RIT group actually did improve lumbar spine BMD. And, so these are the vertebral bones that are often affected by osteoporosis. And these are the ones where fractures occur and you end up with the dowager's hump and that sort of, they call it a kyphosis. So Yeah, they were able to grow spine BMD. They were also able to grow a little bit of BMD at the hip. But what we saw at the hip was more there was a change in bone structure. So thickness of the cortex of the bone and in ways that would make the hip more resistant to fracture. So it wasn't so much a BMD change. It was more of a structural change. And this was a really interesting finding. And because when I saw the BMD results, I thought, how can this be? They don't seem to be changing. But actually, the body is far smarter than scientists. It will change itself to best respond to the loading in a way that is far more practical, because just adding more bone is not the way the body works. It's a very efficient organism. It doesn't add weight. It optimizes the structure. And that's what changing the shape of the thigh bone did.
And that makes it stronger because you've changed the structure in a way.
Yeah. If you think about a pipe, so because bones tend to be hollow, so they've got an outer shell and it's hollow. So the hollowness makes it light. But the wider that pipe is, the stronger it is. For the exact same amount of mass, the wider it is, the stronger it is. And that's what we saw happen. The femoral neck, the part that normally fractures in a hip fracture, got wider, and the cortex itself got thicker and stronger, so more resistant to fracture if somebody was going to fall over on their hip.
That is brilliant.
Yeah, very
So
cool.
good. And here people are thinking, well, just not knowing it's going to happen, testing them on the walking and, as you said, the Tai Chi, but not even trying this. Good on you for giving it a go.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. And I should also mention that obviously we focus on postmenopausal women because they are by far the biggest group of people who are affected. But men do also get osteoporosis and they do still fracture, and their outcomes are often worse. So even though it's a small population, we still needed to test it. So we also did the LIFTMOR for Men trial. And that was testing the same high-rip program, but I was lucky enough to get a grant to be given some equipment to test another program, which is these days is marketed as OsteoStrong. So we tested OsteoStrong against the high-rip program and showed it did not have the same effect. It wasn't improving bone. So it was a really good opportunity to show that. So all programs which are marketed are not the same.
Not the same. No, that's very important. Before we get to Aniro, can you tell us some of the comments you got from the women who participated in the treatment group after they finished the trial?
Yeah, look, I think they were also shocked at what they were able to do. It was, if you had told me I would be doing this, I wouldn't have believed you. Also things like, I'm so much more able to do things that I never thought I would be able to do again. I can join my husband doing, heavy things that he has been doing for years and I just haven't been able to. I can get back out in the garden again. And just basically feeling like I've got my life back. So ultimately, although they were happy to grow bone, for them, the real benefit was this quality of life that they regained. And in fact, some of them felt like they were in better shape aged 70 than they were when they were 40, because they had more strength and it was noticeably different.
That is wonderful. That is awesome. Giving
It is.
quality of life back to people who, when people say, oh, old people can't do anything or you're too old to be lifting heavy things, it's great.
Well, the cool thing is that bone and muscle, to an extent, operate under this sort of principle of initial values. The lower you are to begin with, the more you are likely to respond. And so, a very, very frail little old lady who begins weight training is going to notice enormous changes, because going from a very low place, it's quite easy to actually improve quite a bit. And for muscle, it only takes a couple of weeks before you start to feel the difference and you start being able to lift more. So you get a lot of feedback reasonably quickly from your function improvement.
From the findings of your LIFTMOR clinical trial, you developed an evidence-based exercise program, Aniro. Could you tell us more about the Eniro program and where listeners can find an accredited Eniro practitioner if they're interested in trying this exercise program?
Yeah, sure. After we sort of published the findings of the LIFTMOR trial, it became very obvious that we needed to roll this program out into the general community. But I was very nervous that the rolling out process might actually be harmful, because if people were doing it not supervised by people who knew what they were doing, it is technically a dangerous sort of thing to do. So at that point, the next obvious step was to open a clinic where we could provide the program by trained professionals. We could deliver it exactly the same way as we did the LIFTMOR trial, but we would take all comers. Anybody who wanted to do it could come, and that means, we had people with every single different kind of condition you could imagine, and as long as they can walk independently around to the activities, and they can cognitively understand instructions and follow instructions so they're safe, we will try and help anybody. So the Bone Clinic was set up specifically to be a research facility so that we could test to see if all of these different people could benefit, and in what way and how much. So men, women, young, old, whoever wanted to come could come, and we would just do all the same measures that we did in the LIFTMOR study and keep track of how often they attended and how much they were lifting, so that we could start to look at things like dose response. How much do you have to lift, and how often do you have to do it? So we also added a dietitian, and so there's somebody there to help people with their diet, because most people over the age of 50 are not eating enough calcium, and if they are, it's probably in a whopping great calcium supplement, which is not necessarily the best way to get your calcium. They're not aware of what foods have readily available calcium in them. There's a lot of people who are choosing veganism, and so there's all of those calcium options are off the table for many people. So we just thought it was a good idea to have somebody on deck who could help those people get the calcium they need through their diet. And it is possible. You just need somebody with the knowledge to do that. And we keep track of how much calcium people are eating with a good questionnaire. And so we scan people and test people at baseline, and then offer them the opportunity to do a neuro twice a week. And obviously they pay to come, and that's how I pay my staff, keep my doors open. And then we offer them the opportunity to come back and have, do their assessment again every 12 months, because this is for life. This is not a 12-week program. And throughout the year, I give seminars. And I talk about the sorts of stuff we're talking about now. We talk about bone food and medications and all sorts of stuff. So people who come to the clinic, they also get this really holistic way of managing their condition, all in the one spot. So 10 years on, we've got great data. We're showing that it works in the real world, and it's everything that we've been talking about. It's sort of multiple examples of people having the same experiences and getting a lot out of it. We had only been open a little while when it became very obvious that we needed Oniro in many other places and not just in the clinic, because everybody wanted it. And that's why we licensed it. So we licensed the program, not the whole bone clinic, just the Oniro exercise program, so that it can be delivered by exercise physiologists and physios anywhere in the world. The way to do Oniro is either you come to the clinic, or if you Google Oniro locations, a map will come up. And you just navigate, you can click and drag that map around to where you live, either in Australia or anywhere in the world. And if you see a little tag there with the Oniro emblem, you click on that, and it will drop down with the information about where this licensee is. And if there's nobody near you, the first thing you should do is go to your local physio or exercise physiologist and say, hey, I think you should offer Oniro, because that's how most of our licensees have actually come on board. We don't actively sell. They approach us for a license, and there's huge demand. So this is actually a great revenue stream for people who are licensees. That's their business, and once they've got the license, they run the program there. Now, if you still can't get access to Onero, you can contact the clinic and we'll have a telehealth appointment with you and we'll give you some exercises. It won't be Onero. We will not give you Onero to do on your own, but it'll be something that will be very helpful for you that you can potentially do in your local gym. And if you don't want to do that, the final option is Onero Online. Now, this was stupid of me to call it Onero Online because there's nothing like Onero. It's just another opportunity for people to do. It's more of a falls prevention program. It's quite low intensity, but it has different things that people can do at home, very inexpensive, $5 a week. They can sign up and sign off, cancel their subscription whenever they want. But it's a 2-year progressive sort of balance and mobility with a little bit of bone and muscle loading, but it's really falls prevention. We have a lot of people at the clinic who are doing Onero Online as well as Onero. Those are sort of the 3 options of how people can do something to look after themselves and try and prevent a fracture.
In our show notes, I'll link to the site that you were saying where people can access the map, because we do have listeners all around the world as well. And as you said, it's about that safety and supervision. So if people can't find it near them, perhaps they could approach their physio or their exercise physiologist to contact you and find out more about Onero.
That's right. And I can actually also send you the URL for the Onero Academy so that if you do want to go to your local physio, you can say, if you go to this link, it will show you what the Onero license is all about and it will give them the opportunity to contact us so we can help them.
Perfect. We'll include that as well. Thank you. And yeah, you touched on falls prevention there. We recently had someone on talking about falls prevention. I don't know if we need to cover this. I was just going to ask, can you speak to the importance of the particular types of exercise? But I think we've probably covered that.
I think the one thing to say about falls prevention is it really does require concerted effort with high challenge balance training, or it's not going to make much difference. Again, virtually any kind of exercise is going to be helpful for your muscles, and that's what's going to help you not fall. But to improve your balance, you really have to challenge your balance. And so it's not just about standing on one leg for 30 seconds a day. That's not high enough challenge. There are various other things that you should add in to what you're doing to make it more difficult. And another hint would be, if you are a falls risk, then when you're doing these exercises, make sure you're standing beside the back of your couch where you can grab your couch if you do start to go. Don't stand beside a kitchen chair. That's going to go over with you. Maybe the kitchen bench would be okay, but there's more hard corners in the kitchen. So the back of the couch is the ideal sort of setting, or something else that is high enough for you to be able to grab it quickly and soft enough that if you hit it, that you're not going to hurt yourself.
That's great advice. I was just thinking as you were talking, have you had anyone from the government reach out to you at all? Because I know doctors, they're probably too scared to say to their older patients, go and do some weight training. It would be great if this could get out more. The government spends a lot of money on osteoporosis, downstream when people already have it. I know there was some recent funding announcement about some early prevention and detection, but because doctors are generally prescribing walking or something more soothing. Anyway, I was just thinking off the top of my head, has anyone from the government approached you to sort of...
Well, I think you probably know the answer to that one.
Yeah.
No one from the government's ever going to reach out. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. We are quite small. And as I say, I don't necessarily market the program or go out and
No,
sell.
but you've done the research, so you'd be a great starting point for them.
Yeah, that's right. I just so happened, this wasn't intentional, but I am wearing my Stop Fracture t-shirt today. And Stop Fracture is a funded study. It is funded through the MRFF, which is a big government-funded funding body. And the Stop Fracture study is specifically designed to make doctors more aware of Onero and understand the process of referring and then getting people to actually be referred to neuro providers and then tracking them and seeing if it will make a difference to their risk of fracture. So I'm trying to chip away from that angle, trying to get the word out to doctors, but you're quite right. We are at the bottom of the mountain and there's a long way to go. We're hoping that if we get the evidence from Stop Fracture, that by doing this, by referring people who need it into O'Neill, we can actually reduce hip fractures. And if we do that, then it would absolutely be in the government's best interest to reimburse on the Medibank schedule for O'Neill classes, because just in the same way as perhaps a statin is helping, somebody with another condition, then O'Neill is absolutely reducing fractures, and it is saving the government $35,000 per hip fracture, and that's just one kind of fracture. So it is absolutely, an economically viable model. We're hoping to get the data to do that. And then imagine if you could go to O'Neill and actually get Medicare reimbursement for that.
Yes.
That would change the landscape in fractures in Australia.
I'm so glad you say that Stop Fracture is doing that, because that's what I had in mind, like more awareness for doctors. And then, as you say, you need someone in the government with foresight to look more at prevention, because it costs so much money, and falls, how much money they cost the government as well. What's, like you said, giving someone a Medicare rebate to participate in O'Neill is going to save the health system so much money downstream.
And when you consider that resistance training is known to be beneficial for virtually every other system in the body, giving a rebate for O'Neill is actually also giving a rebate for the exact same program, is helping all those other conditions. And so it's bringing blood pressure down, it's improving mental health. Metabolically, this is improving people with diabetes. So it's such a win-win. It's a difficult job to make people aware of it, because of course now I have a conflict of interest, because the bone clinic is a business and O'Neill is a product, but there was no other way of doing this. And so it's a little bit of a problem. But on the other hand, I'm also generating, industry and more tax for the government if I sell a license and people are actually gaining revenue. So everything about it is very beneficial. It's just the fact that I'm one person and I'm a full-time professor at
I know.
Griffith. And so
I know.
it's
But
not
someone's always, you say the conflict of interest, but it doesn't matter. You still got the research. Someone is going to make money out of it somewhere. But we're talking about the health system, people's quality of life, but that impact to save so much money downstream. As you said, it impacts all our cardiovascular systems, our mental health. Do you have you captured some of that data as well? And I know you've got so much to do. So I'm hoping someone in the government could say, hey, I need to look into this, because you can present them with the data. They could get some economists to do some costing, and then perhaps they could do a short trial with some people and say, well, we predict that this small intervention costing this much money is going to save 10, 100 times more that money downstream. That's what we need.
Well, we do have an economic evaluation associated with Stop Fracture. So we are hoping to do that. In Stop Fracture, we don't have all of those other health outcomes measured because we only had a small pot of money and time. But I am measuring blood pressure at the bone clinic because I knew that this is going to be something that was relevant to other body systems. But given that we do a really comprehensive 2.5-hour baseline assessment, if I started measuring all the other things, people would just arc up and say, I've had enough. I don't want you testing me anymore. So blood pressure is the little thing that was quick but very important for health, and we are indeed showing that it is coming down. Both systolic and diastolic blood pressure is coming down. So yeah, I would love to be able to show that there is impact on all of these other systems. To do a study like that, it sounds quite easy, but it would be horribly expensive because the numbers you would need would be very large, but would be a great study.
I wanted to mention also that your Onero program is endorsed by Healthy Bones Australia. And I was having a look at their website earlier today as well. And I just wanted to mention that is a great resource for people to go on and have a look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll link to them in the show notes as well. I was just going to ask, for someone who's never really thought about their bone health before, what's one small action that they can take today?
Probably the two things. Just think about your diet. You know, it might be worth seeing a dietitian, but if you don't have access to one, then there's an enormous amount of information online. Eat a balanced diet. Make sure you're getting enough calcium. Get some vitamin D, because if you don't have enough vitamin D, you can't absorb the calcium from your gut. Eat enough protein. Don't forget protein. It's very important. So those three things, calcium, vitamin D, protein, are the building blocks. And then just move more. Do not sit around all day. You know, I know I've said that walking is not effective, but walking's better than sitting on your bottom. So, you know, even if you do have a fall, oftentimes people develop a fear of falling, and so they don't go out as much. They sit on the couch, and all that is doing is increasing your risk of falling a second time. So, you know, if worst comes to worst and you're not able to do any of those three things that I mentioned, either do Onero, have a telehealth appointment with us, or do Onero online, maybe just join a gym and get somebody to help you do some type of exercise in the gym. Anything is better than nothing.
Do you advise women in particular, because osteoporosis is more prevalent for women, do you advise us to get a baseline scan and assessment of our bone health, our bone density around the time of perimenopause, menopause?
100%. Yep. If you're able to, definitely, if it looks like you're heading into menopause, get yourself a baseline. Find out where you started. And then only then will you be able to understand how much you're losing. Some people lose more than others. Certainly from that baseline, you then really need to be getting one every 2 years or so just to check through menopause that you're not losing too much. And you might want to talk to your doctor about the options that are available to you. If you started very low and perhaps you've seen your parents or grandparents with severe osteoporosis, menopause is the time to take advantage of hormone replacement, or they're calling it menopausal hormone therapy now. That might be, you know, an opportune time to get on that before you lose too much.
So before we finish up, something I ask all of our guests, could you please share with us your 3 favourite ways to mind your being?
Well, having said all that very negative stuff about walking, I love walking and reading. Now, I don't recommend this to other people, but I've been doing it my whole life. I have a Kobo and I walk and I read my Kobo. So I'm getting the benefits of two things. I love reading. So I get to read every day, and I get to walk and get my blood moving. That's important. I also I like to drink tea.
Me too.
Black tea. And if I can have one guilty pleasure after a weekend of finding myself working all weekend, I'll sit down and watch Antiques Roadshow.
Yep.
That for me is a lovely stress relief, and I do my best to try and guess what everything's worth on Antiques. I'm getting better as I watch it more.
Oh,
A tea drinking antiques geek.
I love it. Do you have a favourite brand of tea?
Actually, funny you should ask that. Of all the places where you wouldn't think you would find good tea because of its association with coffee, I found a tea shop in Seattle, and they had their brand breakfast tea. And I swear it's the best tea I've ever drunk.
Oh, wow. And can you import it into Australia now?
Well, I don't know. I bought the biggest bag I could buy, and I haven't finished it yet. And so, yeah, I might have to fly to Seattle to get my next lot.
Awesome. I love tea too. And for the listeners, I commented at the start of the podcast that Belinda has the best bookcase behind her, chockers with books, and I'm jealous.
Yes, I do love anatomy. I've taught anatomy, and so probably that top layer is mainly anatomy books. You can never have too many books about anatomy.
I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. When I decided I was going to get the podcast going, you were one of the first guests I reached out to. And credit to you, earlier in the year, you were too busy. You were flying all over the world talking about your beautiful study and this Anero program. But instead of just saying, I can't do it, you offered that I should reach out to you later in the year, which I did. And here we are today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always happy
And
to talk about bone.
I think it's a great conversation, and I hope that people can take some practical tips away from this. We will link to everything in the show notes so people can find an accredited Anero practitioner near them, and they can also look up the Bone Clinic online and find everything in the show notes. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Mind Your Being podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please follow the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with a friend who might enjoy it too. If you have a moment, please leave a quick review. It really helps others discover the podcast. Thanks again for being here. Take care, and until next time, mind your being.